Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the session, The Role of Technology in Enabling a Values-Based Business. I'm not going to make any attempt to say what are good and bad values, but if one looked at excellence, integrity, and solidarity that gave you trust and accountability, you'd be talking about FIFA. And we don't want to go there, but I think one has got to make the point that it's incredibly dangerous sometimes if you don't live the values, or potentially live the values that you mean within an organization. Many years ago, I was at a conference where somebody in a leadership role asked me about values along with 60 people. And we were all on tables of 6, and we didn't know anybody, a little bit like everyone today. And the word honesty came up of whether that should be a good value or not. And everybody agreed that on a rating of 10, they would give it 9. Honesty was a value we want in our business. So he looked at us all and he said, I'd like you to look at your colleagues on your table and say who you trust least amongst who you've just met. And I'm going to ask one of you to stand up and say who it is. I was unfortunately the person they asked to stand up. Luckily, I did know somebody, so I chose her. But it sometimes means that when we talk about values, judgment comes into the equation as well. My name's Phil Purver. I run a company called The Working Manager, TWM, and I'm delighted that although on the agenda I was going to be doing this on my own, one of our clients, Bromford, is going to give you far greater detail of how the technology has rolled out across the organization in a values-based culture with a real case study from a client rather than myself. And so I'm delighted to introduce Matt Cox from Bromford, who will join me in about 10 minutes' time. So in terms of the agenda, and when I was asked to put this brief together, it's a lot to try and squeeze into 30 minutes. So we appreciate there might be questions you have afterwards. Matt and I are happy to stay back. Our stand is just over at the back. But the key point about this is that from a learning and development intervention where values are often rolled out into training programs, into performance management, the whole point is it's very often about a change agenda. It's about how do things really link to strategy, not we've got a series of values that we stick on a poster in reception, that it actually is part of the DNA of any organization. An organization lives them, breathes them, and it goes throughout a whole company. So these are the points we're going to weave in to our talk today. And in terms of, and I'm not going to dwell on the slide, but the types of change which often affects the way we roll out values linked to mission. In Greece right now, there's potentially a lot of change about to go on. HSBC have just announced 8,000 job losses. And change happens at very large layers and much smaller layers where a new CEO comes on board, a new COO. It could be we're going through acquisition, we're going to grow, we're going to sell more. I've just had VC money pumped into our company. And sometimes one's driven by business objectives, KPIs, and you have all the sale more, increase your revenue, profitable revenues. And then you've got an FD's favorite thing sometimes, if you don't make share price, you cut costs. And values that have been brought up in your business about integrity and empowering, things can go out of the window and be undone in a couple of minutes because suddenly cost cutting across the business, whereas you could spend money, you can't do it anymore. So what we're going to do is talk about change, and when we talk about Matt's section in a minute, typically we end up here with the HR and people agenda, but systemically everything should be interrelated. And each of these different areas should have some form of strategy coming out of them. And one asks, yep, that's the case, because if I've got change going on and I've got 3 priorities at the board of an organization, whether I'm in the supermarket business at the moment where there's huge pressure on the Sainsbury's and the Tesco's and everybody else, there will be a whole, or should be a list of integrated strategies where values come into it and they don't get shoveled down here somewhere. Making sure people really do live them, and so we're going to look at the way technology helps that happen across the whole organization, including the chief executive. If you look at an employee's life in a business, we hire them and they ask, these are our values. It's about integrity, or it's about professionalism, or it's about empowering. And all the way through my life within a company, and I'm going to have performance management and nurture them and develop them, one expects that's what I joined for. That's what I came to this organization for. And the travels we go on, where people turn around and say, you know what, it wasn't the company I thought I joined. Or this change has just happened, it's not what I was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And if one has a look, and you only have to come to a learning technology show where we look at all the learning and development interventions, where we look at all the learning and development interventions down here, we do learning and development because that links to performance management. If I've got a performance review, however I do it, and I've been taught some courses where we're trying to ripple values through it, I would expect that performance process to be handled in the same way. Similarly, performance management looks backwards and forwards, and if I'm looking forward to my career and my talent development and succession planning, how do the values come into that in the way I'm treated, the way my line manager deals with me? When I'm starting to look at the social world, I'm looking to look at the new MD, I'm looking to new management teams, values should permeate everything. I once spoke to the MD when I was a management consultant of an organization who proudly told me the company values, the board had worked on them, and it was now rippling throughout the organization. I said, great, why don't we pop down to reception and ask the receptionist what they are? He looked at me in absolute horror because he believed that because the board had defined them, because they'd stuck them on a piece of paper, everybody knew the behaviors that made up those values. Everybody believed. So I said, come on, let's go. We didn't go. I didn't do any work with him. But he said to me, when I met him months later, he said, you were so right, Phil. We don't permeate the values in everything we do. We often pay lip service to it. And that's what Bromford have done. They've used technology to make sure it permeates the whole organization. A negative story, but a positive story, was a professional services firm. They had a series of values. They'd grown by acquisition, 5 different acquisitions. The only thing in their life was how much are we billing our clients and how utilized are we at billing rates. So these were their values. The L&D team thought that the company managed by telepathy. They were absolutely horrified at the lack of leadership skills in the business, and we used technology to do an assessment to see how close to the values was the organization. You can use 360, SurveyMonkey. We did this exercise. We gave them and said, look, let's test out what you know about management and leadership, but down here against the values, let's just see what you do and don't know. No right, no wrong answers. Just tell us what you do, bearing in mind this is a professional services company. So there's only 2 things they really need to know about: billing and being busy billing in terms of what they were doing. And they were losing market share. I won't go into the way we correlated the statements, and we did positive and we did negative ones, but the overall score of the entire management population, 2 layers beneath the board, was such that their values around commitment to execute was their lowest. We were able to break it down by division, by individual managers, although for data protection reasons you didn't make that public. We gave one-on-one with people, and the L&D team, for the first time, with the other work we did on competency assessment, said, we knew it, we knew it, we knew it. Now we have evidence to go to the board. Because here was a business in trouble, sailing for the rocks. We went to the board with the leadership team, with myself, with the L&D team, because we said, this is serious. You've got some cultural challenges here in the business. We were welcomed, but shortly afterwards, not due to us, the CEO left the business. It went through massive downsizing, and they had a complete and utter cultural disaster in the way they were running that company. And it was hurting everything about it and the people as well. To make matters worse on an individual level, and here was Joe Bloggs, or Joe Burns, this person was an example of very low commitment to execute, and part of the culture was line managers should be feeding back to an individual in a positive, constructive way. He was given his report in a taxi on the way to a meeting, and his boss said, "You better read this." And yet here was somebody who was on the 31st percentile. So of all the people we tested, he was in the bottom third of people and at least understand what is going on. So we just used technology very simply in this case. Where there was a suspicion, we got data, we played it back. Matt, on the other hand, has an incredibly positive story. And it's a very nice point now where I can show you the corollary of this and the flip side and pass you to Matt Cox. So Matt, thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for attending. Just want to talk about Bromford. Back in December, our chief exec of 30 years retired, and we promoted within to keep the culture. And what's happened with government funding and local authorities, our landscape is changing. So part of that, we're on this new role. Traditionally, Bromford's a housing association. We provide homes and we provided support. And the challenge has been how we bring the business together. But the one thing that's always remained throughout Bromford is our culture and values are the key, and they still run today as they did 10, 15 years ago. What happened was, when I first joined 5 years ago, induction was 2 days, and I had to learn mission, vision. There was 6 leaders' expectation and 6 colleague expectations, and we always had to provide evidence and discuss how we supported that. What the feedback was it was too complicated, too much to remember. So we asked colleagues to say, well, what is it you want? What do you think would make it easier? And we came up with these. This is our DNA, and this flows all the way through the business, from our chief exec, when she's doing Twitter, when she's at conferences, to our colleagues out with our customers. And they're very simple: be different, be brave, be good, and be commercial. So part of that, as an L&D, we had to work out how do we embed this within the business and make sure colleagues are having that conversation and managers are driving it through. So in partnership with the working manager, we sat down and discussed our LMS system. We had a traditional one that attached to the HR, very manual process, and we wanted to bring it alive. So we split it out in 4 sections, and what we've done, some is bespoke to us, our performance, and some is standard products we work with the TWM. But we've got performance, my learning, and learning communities. And the idea, all colleagues have access to this, and the idea of the system is the managers from the CEO can see everybody's performance in their line management change. But one thing we have just launched recently is our onboarding. Now, traditionally, onboarding is associated with recruitment, but we wanted to make sure we get the values and the culture to our colleagues who are joining the business. When colleagues get offered a job with Bromford, most colleagues are excited, they're joining, got a job, and we wanted to capitalise on that and get our values and our DNA across. So we left the traditional onboarding, filling in forms and stuff like that with the HR team, and what we do is send them the link to Be Bromford. And they only get this bit, which is all about our culture, DNA. And what we've got videos, we've got exercises, all different things that will bring the Be Good, Be Commercial theme and thread all the way through. We don't expect new colleagues to actually go through it before they start, but on day one, we hope they've had a bit of a taster. So during day one, they can hit the ground running, they understand the culture and our DNA, but also they can start their jobs and get what we're about. The next thing we link into new starters, along with the induction, is our performance model. Biggest thing in Be Bromford is conversations with line managers. Colleagues are expected to have conversations once a month, once a quarter, to discuss how they're feeling, how they're bringing the DNA alive. They'll also talk about their job and the targets, but we really emphasise the importance of the colleague and how they're performing and dealing with our customers. How do we bring the DNA alive? What we did, we created this tool And the idea is colleagues assess themselves every time they have a one-to-one with the manager. So they rate themselves on a 1 to 5. At first, the colleagues all put 5, and the challenge is, well, prove it, because they try to be clever. But the idea is the manager rates the colleague as well on those DNA. And what this did was spark conversations, and it was like, well, why are you a 5? Why do you think I'm a 1? And the idea is to bring our DNA alive. Behind the DNA, there are a set of values and descriptors, which I'll show you later. There's no right or wrong, it's down to the individual team. What we just say is keep in line with the indicators that we have. The other thing we've just created, and this is for our frontline colleagues, the issue we have is they don't have much time. Our repairs colleagues are out there repairing our properties, and getting them in to do an hour's one-to-one conversation with the manager is very difficult. So what we've created is role standards tool. These are written in line with the line managers and the management team of each team. And the idea is that the manager can go out, observe and assess, and rate them against a set of standards. Each standard also has a line across to our DNA. So again, we're getting our DNA into the standards. What can happen then with those role standards is the colleague and the manager every quarter will have a conversation. But as a business, we can get where the values and the standards are great, not so great, and as an L&D team, then we can work with the team to improve that. And that may be going to toolbox talks, it may be putting some formal learning on, it may be more outside organisations coming in to help us. Just to give an example of one of our big commercial indicators, as you can see, we've got what success means, and we have development indicators. These are just guidelines for managers to work around, and these were written in conjunction with colleagues. It wasn't just the senior management team saying it was here. So it's all about commitment from both sides. During those one-to-one conversations, if the values, the DNA aren't being discussed, what we do is we're trying to link the learning. So if it's about presentation, customer service skills, leadership skills, we're trying to move our learning digitally. It's all about snapshots, online, quick hits. We're also getting it to them outside of the formal classroom. When I first joined, it was all formal learning. There was nothing online. But we're enhancing, using technology now to bring those workshops online. For instance, we do drug awareness. Colleagues will do that once every 2 years. But as soon as they meet someone who has got a drug issue, how do they find that information? Normally the folders on the cupboard, lost, or in the boot, or even binned. So what we're trying to do, they can get it at the fingertips before they go and see that client. We still support formal learning, but we're trying to make sure that's more of a conversation about what's happening out there. We're also, because we're Midlands based, there's 1,200 of us, we have customers and colleagues down in Aylesbury to Stoke, and they all do the same kind of support. So how do we share that? We created a learning communities where colleagues can post questions, different kind of learning they've been on. And so if there is an issue about, I don't know, a drug awareness or a certain drug, they can post it, and a colleague, it may not necessarily be the L&D team or the subject expert, might have responded because they came across that. We also use it to use campaign learning to promote the learning, and we're sort of like, we've got about 200 to 250 users, so leadership now, they use discussions in forums to share their observations and the learning. Just going back to the performance rating, at the end of the year we have an appraisal, which is a combination of all the one-to-one talks, how you're performing on your DNA, and colleagues are rated by the manager. And the idea is then we can see where they are, but our ratings, which is star performer, say, which is the top one, that means you're overachieving your targets, your DNA is excellent, you're doing way, way above. And this is all about us driving the culture. As you can see, they're not in any particular order, because we say we don't want you working up, we want everybody to be great colleagues at least. But as a business, then we can work with the ones that aren't performing and find out where they are. Those that are outperforming, then we talk about talent and succession with them. We just this last week launched Be Bromford Mobile. We're doing it in tiny steps. This is about getting our DNA across. As I mentioned, we've got our learning communities where we share information. The role standards, the idea is it's not in a room. They can be out in the field, observing, click, click, and bring it back. Newbie is our onboarding. So again, colleagues can see that. It doesn't stop after they get in day one. We can use through probation and after. So if a colleague is not understanding DNA or element part of our culture, then they can refer back to that. But the main thing is colleagues now come to an induction with us for 2 hours. That's all we do. They meet the chief exec for an hour and then we just drive the bees. It's all about us getting the values across, and we feel if colleagues obviously believe in these and live by them, we will great customer service to our customers, and then that will improve our advocacy. It'll also improve our recommendations for potential suppliers, and also obviously businesses that are willing to invest into a social landlord. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just in terms of really a final slide, people often talk about ROI, return on investment, as opposed to this, which is you really want to start looking at return on excellence. And from one of our other clients, we've now starting to collect data, sometimes very much on the soft side, of what are the benefits of putting a values-based culture in an organization. This wasn't Bromford, some of these. This is actually from another client. But when you come back to it, and in Bromford's case, the chief exec uses the system, the board used the system. For me, the place these things live or die is line management. And I often go out and ask our customers and prospects, how do you rate your line managers between 1 and 10 in their ability to manage and coach and develop their people, or your people? Most answers are average. Some are very good, some are terrible. And very often we end up getting into cultures where just because I'm good at my job, I've got the senior role and I'm a man manager or a person manager. And if we're going to make values really stick and actually tie it back up to the board and link it to the change agenda, to the strategy, everybody must embrace it. Because the little anecdote I told you about that MD, and I said we go down to reception, if you're not careful, all values become is a poster in reception to look at when we all arrive. And technology, coupled together with the human side of all of our businesses, can make a massive, massive difference. And you don't have to make it expensive. It hasn't got to be huge steps in one go. It just needs everyone engaged in the process. And when they say, I take it seriously, they do. And on that note, thank you very much. Thank you.